Fine with us for a second segment today, our friend Aaron Renn from the Manhattan Institute, City Journal, and Urban File. Aaron, thank you for staying on the line. Let's go to segment 2, which is Kokomo, shining in the Rust Belt. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, a lot of people probably know Kokomo as I think it was a Beach Boys song or something like that.
I remember that, yeah.
A mythical tropical island paradise, fictional. The real Kokomo is a small industrial city in the state of Indiana, heavily tied to the automobile industry. Chrysler had a huge plant there. GM had a huge plant there. And the good news is for them, the great news for them is that unlike many cities, their plants didn't close, but that left them very exposed to the auto crisis in the late 2000s. And so when Chrysler was in bankruptcy, close to bankruptcy, it stopped paying property taxes to the city, and the city nearly went bankrupt because that was the biggest property tax payer in town. And during that, I believe it was in 2008 when he was running for president, Barack Obama went to Kokomo and talked about the kind of community that he wanted to help, and he used it as a place to take a victory lap after the bailout. That whatever the merits or demerits of that bailout were, it definitely saved Kokomo as a city. And after essentially peaking at a 20% unemployment rate, nearly going bankrupt in this auto crisis, leaders in the community basically said, we have to start doing some things differently. We can't just rely on these plants anymore. And so they went on a quite a transformation spree in the city that I think makes them one of the true Rust Belt places to watch. Unlike Columbus, Ohio, or one of the other cities we talked about earlier, there's really no high-end, white-collar type businesses in this town. It's a blue-collar town. It's a manufacturing town still to this day. And how places like Kokomo end up faring and whether they can reinvent themselves for the 21st century, I think says a lot about how a lot of America is going to do. And so I did this profile in City Journal in the autumn issue looking at Kokomo and some of the very positive things that have been happening there.
I see it says more than 200 upscale apartments have been built across several developments and new senior housing, and upgraded public housing. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This mayor who's now in his third term, his name's Greg Goodnight. He's a very interesting character. He was the former president of the local United Steelworkers Union, and there was a metal fabricating plant there that was his union. His dad had been the regional president of the Teamsters, so this guy was a sort of a union blue blood who was elected mayor and then immediately started cutting costs in government. So the employee headcount for the city went way down, as he's like, we have to free up some cash flow to start investing in our community, because basically the lure for the community had always been jobs. We've got these great jobs at Chrysler and GM, or a metal fabricating plant, Haynes International, where he had worked. And so it didn't really matter like what the community looked like or what amenities were there. The high-paying jobs were the amenities. Well, today, you don't want to put too much reliance on those high-paying jobs being there forever. And what they realized was like 9,000 people commute into work in the community. It's actually a sort of a destination for commuters, but people live in all sorts of other surrounding communities. They're not choosing to live in Kokomo. So he says we have to change that and make this the community of choice for people to want to live in. So they recruited a developer out of Indianapolis to come in and build some nicer apartments in their downtown. They also tried to upgrade their public housing and senior housing and different things like that. So it hasn't necessarily been, I think, like some of these gentrification strategies, let's just spend all our money trying to get rich people to come here. There has been a lot put into basic public services and things that disproportionately benefit the poor, like public housing and like starting a new bus system. The city had never had a bus system, or had had one, but it had been discontinued decades ago, so they started up a brand new bus system. But they've also done a lot of streetscape improvements. Mm-hmm. They converted all their downtown streets to two-way from one-way. They got rid of all the stoplights in the core of their downtown and just put stop signs in. They made parking free. They built a new YMCA. And there's just many, many things that they've tried to do to create a much more attractive community that people will want to live in. And the theory that they have is a lot of the workers in these plants are baby boomers. They're retirement age. They're going to be retiring, and they're going to hire new, younger workers. So their basic thinking is we need to have a community that these new, younger workers are going to choose to live in, not just work in,
right.
and raise families in. So that's what they're trying to do.
What do you see for Kokomo? It looks good, huh?
Well, they do have they do have an aging population there, and they're set to lose people. So they're not, they're still early days. Mm-hmm. I mean, almost every place has, like a coffee house in their downtown now. You can't write too much into that. I think a lot of it's going to be a long-term game. Will this just be kind of some flash in the pan improvements that when the next recession hits, all these businesses go under? And the town's right back where they started, or are they building something sustainable over time? Columbus, Ohio, which we talked about, it's been growing for 30, 40 years, and had a rough 2000s, but has really kind of been a city that's been on the rise for a while. Kokomo, it's going to take a while to find out where they end up, but they seem to be on the right track so far.
What is housing cost there? Like an example, buying a house or renting an apartment. What's the rates there now? Aaron?
I actually don't know,
really?
But I can tell you it's pretty cheap. And there's a variety, too. I mean, there are houses in kind of the older part of the town that, there are older houses that need to be fixed up, certainly less than $100,000.
Wow.
And then there are nicer homes out in subdivisions on the fringes that cost more. I don't know the exact price, but you should be able to rent an apartment for well under $1,000.
That's amazing.
$1 a month there.
Well, for young people, that's an advantage. If they're working in there, it's a great advantage because that's the biggest portion of your check is going to the rent or the car payment. And then the credit cards.
Those sorts of things matter. And for Kokomo, this is a quirk of Indiana. In Indiana, in most places, you pay local income tax, based on where you work. Whereas in Indiana, local income tax is paid predominantly based on where you live. So the fact that 9,000 people commute into town, unlike most states where Kokomo would be collecting the income tax revenue off of those jobs, most of that income tax is going back to the places where those people live. So attracting the workers is important for local income tax purposes as well. Fiscally.
Got it. And again, the population's what, about 45,000?
Well, it was 45,000 when the auto crisis hits. They've done some annexations. It's about 57,000 people. But the county, I think for cities like this, the county is really probably the best unit to look at. It has around 80,000 people.
Nice
so
size.
It's not a big place.
Not a big place.
But it's also not remote. It's less than an hour from Indianapolis.
Oh, okay. So there's good possibilities, and there's possibly a good future for Kokomo.
Yeah,
and you were there, in
the
autumn? You were there in the autumn, Aaron?
Excuse me?
You were there in the autumn? Is that when you were there?
Well, the article was on the autumn issue of City Journal. I was there over the summer.
Okay.
When I reported the story. But I'd been going there. I'd been there in 2014. I first made my first trip there because I saw a blogger had put up a post about a trail that they'd built, and it really struck me that the trail was unusually well designed. Every place has trails now, but I'm like, wow, they paid a lot of attention to detail, and so I went up there, and that's one of the things that I do think distinguishes a lot of what they've done versus other communities. The mayor there, he's a very interesting guy. He does not have a college degree, but if you look at the bookshelf behind him, his desk, it's like every urban planning book that's ever been written, every famous book on cities, and he's read them all and really applies a lot of best practices from other places to what he's doing and pays a lot of attention. They really sweat the details. I think that's one of the things that so many places get wrong They want to, put in some flower pots or whatever like that to beautify the city, but they don't really design them all that well. So it's very important, in an era when money is still tight for a lot of people and for a lot of cities. When you spend money, you have to get the absolute max value out of a dollar, and that means you really have to sweat the details and get it right. And that's something that they have by and large done, I think.
That's a great story. That's why I love reading your stuff, and I love listening. You have the audio blog where you have guests on. You had who was the lady that just traveled the whole country with going to different cities and towns?
Yeah.
And what was her name?
That was a woman by the name of Oriana Schwent.
Right.
And she wrote. She did a little project, a journalistic project, where she went to the city that was closest to the geographic center of every state in America. And so she went to when she came back, she realized a lot of these cities were sort of running together in her head because they all seemed the same. And so, like all good journalists, she's like, how can I repurpose some of this material for more than one thing? And she ended up writing an article for New York Magazine called The Unbearable Sameness of Cities, where she basically talked about effectively every city now increasingly looks like Brooklyn, at least in terms of the establishments. You go into a coffee shop, they have the same lights from IKEA everywhere. They got the same Edison lamps. They've got the same chairs. And you probably noticed this. It's like the same... It's like they're all ordering from the same catalog and the exact same designs. And it is something where I think today it's something to think about, particularly because I think so many places actually do have so much authentic local character that they could express in the design of new places. But so often everybody just kind of wants to imitate Brooklyn because they think that's what's cool. And like a lot of things, it'll end up looking dated, right? It'll end up looking like, 70s fashion. It's like whatever the fashion today is, right? We all know 10 years from now, we're going to look back and go, what were we thinking? Right. And it's going to be something like that with a lot of these coffee shops and microbreweries. This aesthetic is going to end up looking like, from the last 5 years, which it is. And so I always encourage communities to think about their own authentic traditions. There's nothing wrong with having a good coffee shop. There's nothing wrong with lamps from IKEA. But also try to think about all the things that are true and authentic to your place, and make sure that you don't abandon your own history and character in order to try to be appealing to the same generic hipsters that are everywhere now.
When you were speaking with that lady, I was thinking about that. I said, you made me laugh when I listened to a certain part of it, because I said it's true. If you see the Edison lamps in Williamsburg, you're going to find them in Hackensack, New Jersey.
Right, they're going to be everywhere. And she noticed the lamps. I noticed the chairs. There's only about 3 or 4 different kinds of chairs that everyone does. And now, like a big thing that became popular is these food halls. Uh-huh. Well, a food hall is sort of a fancy name for a food court, right? They supposedly have a little bit, hipper taco stands or whatever. But they all have the same exact. You go to any city and you go into one of these things. They ordered the seating. They ordered everything from the exact same catalog.
They send somebody out to look at it and then they order it.
Yeah, I don't understand it. It's like people used to critique the suburbs as being, very monolithic, very boring. They're cookie cutter suburbs, people used to talk about. Well, now we essentially have cookie cutter cities. And a lot of the urban people get very sensitive when you point that out, because they still like to think that they're cool and unique and different. It's like you're edgy, but in fact, urban stuff is not very edgy anymore. It's kind of the conventional now.
Well, if you look at places like a Little Rock or something, you see it on some of these travel shows or PBS shows. Like you say, they have their own little uniqueness, but they don't exploit that. They want to be somebody else. I go to this coffee place in Winchester, Virginia once in a while. It's a nice place. It's a big, tremendous, probably a 4,000 square foot place. They got couches. You put the laptop if you want to play laptop, and whatever. But they have each coffee mug is different. They got some burlap coffee bags on the wall for decoration. You know, it's unique in its own way. And they have the tin ceilings, you know, and the Edison lights.
Right.
Yeah. But the mugs, what makes this place unique is they can put the burlap things on the walls. They got some nice paintings. Looks a little artsy. Doesn't look Brooklyn. You know, it looks Winchester, Virginia. But what makes it great is it has a good cup of coffee, but it has each coffee cup is a different mug. So that's
right.
Their little quirk. But that's their little place, their own little Idaho, you know what I'm saying? And I think people, like you say, they have a uniqueness, these urban centers, especially the Midwest. It has its own character and charm, and people should just exploit it, you know, do it the best they can for the locals.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a place that did a good job of that is Nashville, Tennessee. If you go to Nashville, there's a lot of Williamsburg, there's a lot of Brooklyn in Nashville, but they didn't forget country music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they didn't forget the local traditions too. There's nothing wrong with having a little slice of Brooklyn, but don't forget about what you do as well. And so I think Nashville's got a good balance there of embracing what they're all about with country.
City. I love Nashville. It's a great city. Aaron, where are you going next? Do you have any plans for right after January where you're going to be traveling to?
Nothing in terms of reporting, but I'm working on some stuff about some of the Rust Belt cities that aren't doing so well. So you can look forward to that.
Well, you know, you have that great website. You know, I look at the website all the time, and you made up some changes on it. So you know, I view that, and I like that you have the podcast going on. By the way, I sent you a picture. It's a great picture of you with a pair of glasses, I think, standing in New York City or wherever. And I sent it to the producer, Mike, because he has the same picture from City Journal on I don't know how many times now. Yeah, we have to change the pictures of some of the guests that we have on the show. But, Aaron, I want to thank you once again for coming on, doing a double segment, too.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always great to be on.
And we put some good music for you. You know that we always travel with you with the
music.
And we want to wish you and your family a very happy New Year. Look forward to seeing you. I hope I can get here in less than 6 months the next time. I hope John gets tired enough that he'll bring me back by maybe February or March, and I'll have you back on. Aaron Renn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty, sir. Bye-bye.